Good evening. William James Kennedy is the person I want to talk about tonight, my paternal grandfather. Born in Auckland, South Australia in 1895, he died in 1997, so aged 102. And in case you're wondering, yes, we are related to the Fitzgerald Kennedys. In fact, his mother was somehow a Fitzgerald Kennedy. I said to my dad once, "Did you know that, Dad, that we're related to the Fitzgerald Kennedys?" And my dad said, "I need that news like a hole in the head." Now, see, if that's your kind of humour, it would have gotten like a house on fire with my grandfather, because that was him all over. I've picked him to talk about because it's true, isn't it? I think that the elders in our lives don't always wear tweed jackets and smoke a pipe and put their arm around our shoulder and deliver some little pearl of wisdom to us. Sometimes our elders are as tough as nails and about as forgiving as nails, and Bill Kennedy was like that. In fact, one time my father remembers the two of them walking along the street in South Australia one time in Renmark, and Bill saw a local savage dog he didn't like particularly. He said, "I hate that dog." And he leant down and he picked up half a brick to throw it. And he threw it, and by some flukish chance, the brick hit the dog square on the head, and it fell over dead. And my dad said there was a stunned kind of silence, and then Bill said, "Pete, run home and get the shovel." That is him. He really hated cats more than dogs, actually. He used to breed birds, and for that reason, every cat that came into his yard was fair game. He had all these. We weren't allowed to walk in the garden beds because Bill used to have rabbit traps set in there for cats that came in to kill his birds, I swear. And Dad said he was always like this. And he would just dispatch them and bury them. And little old ladies had come into the garden saying, "Mr. Kennedy, have you seen my cat?" And being the sort of chivalrous, charismatic, irascible, bloody-minded old bloke he was, he'd say, no, but let's go and look for it, shall we? And he'd take his arm and off they'd go. In fact, Dad said one time he was literally tramping down the dirt with the spade in his hand when Mrs. Whelan from down the road came into the garden asking if he'd seen her cat. And he said, "No, we'll go and have a look for it." And as he walked past, his sons were standing there aghast. And Dad said he turned to the boys, and as he went past, he said, "She was standing on it." Now, these stories do not surprise me at all, because when I was a little kid growing up, and there seemed to be hundreds of grandkids around, he had 7 children, brought them all up in the Depression, fire-breathing Irish Catholic, you know, that kind of really hard life. Well, by the time the grandkids came along, that's exactly what he was like, only kind of more so. And we were always kind of competing for his affection. There seemed to be dozens of us, and he used to play us all off against each other in that classic way that certain old men know just how to do. And he used to say, all you kids, all of you run around the block, and the first one who gets back here is my favourite." And we'd all go building off around the block, you know, as fast as we could to get back, and we'd get back from the front of the house, and he would have gone inside to watch the cricket. The thing that he had that I remember most of all as a child was he had this incredible room at the front of the house, and it was full of all the stuff that kids love, you know, the kind of stuff I mean. He had one of those little birds that kind of, you know, dipped down and drank out of a glass of water and then tipped itself back up again, those little birds. And he had like a fossilised crayfish, and he had like a really great set of binoculars and a little clockwork train on a spring that he used to wind up, and we were allowed to watch but not wind, you know, and he'd run around the little spring, and we just thought it was great. Jar of Jaffas, you know. And he had a riding crop, but of course, being Bill, it wasn't just a riding crop, no. That was the riding crop that the jockey who rode Far Lap in the Melbourne Cup had used to send the big horse home to victory. Now, don't touch that crop, it's important. So I had all this stuff in his room, and the room was like a sort of an imaginarium, you know. It was like this kind of amazing TARDIS, full of the most magical things that we can imagine, and nothing sort of after that ever really compared to being allowed to be the grandkid who went into Bill's room and saw all that stuff. You know, later in life, I went to lots of great museums and stuff, you know. I was sort of in the British Museum thinking, yeah, it's good, but It hasn't got Far Lap's whip. But the story I most want to tell you about, that's the one that is our family legend story about Bill, was he was hanging out one day with Uncle Snow. Now, I never really worked out what relation Uncle Snow really was. He just always used to be hanging around, and so we had to call him Uncle. You know, one of those people in the family, one of your granddad's friends, and like, hi, Uncle Snow. You know. And they were sitting there talking, and they were discussing, I'm sure you guys know this too, that the streets of Adelaide are laid out on a perfect square mile grid. It's called Light's Vision. Governor Light devised it. And everything's perfectly kind of aligned in this perfect square mile. And Bill's theory was that, therefore, if you were travelling in a car going at a certain speed, hypothetically, you should be able to never miss a green light. And by chance, he'd happened to calculate what that speed was. So he and Uncle Snow got in the car to try out the theory. And everything was going well for the first few streets, you know, the lights were green and they were kind of, you know, zooming through. But both being the kind, it began to go wrong. By about the third or fourth traffic light, they hit an orange. And he had to speed up a little bit to get the light. Because both being the sorts of blokes who would rather, literally, I think, die than admit that perhaps they were mistaken. And they began to go faster and faster and faster through the traffic lights until finally they were just belting through red lights. And inevitably had a minor bingle with some oncoming traffic coming through an intersection. And the police had to be called, and here were these two belligerent old red-faced men, both in their 80s, I might add, anxious to explain to the young 22-year-old cop about their theory of the vehicle speed to go. And the policeman said to them, "Have you two been drinking?" And Bill said, "Oh, I've had a couple of drinks, yes. What of it? What's it to you?" And the cop said, "Well, I don't know, would you call yourself a regular drinker?" He said, "Oh, what does that mean, regular drinker? What's that?" And the cop said, "Well, I don't know, do you reckon you'd have more than 5 beers in one day?" And Bill said, "5 beers? Mate, I spill more than that." Now, it's these little reckless moments of contrariness, I suppose, and belligerence and fearlessness and kind of, I don't know, a bloody-mindedness in the face of life that's what really looms large for me still about him, and I guess that's why I look at him as a sort of an elder for those sorts of reasons. Then he had these little sudden flashes of, you know, kind of reckless generosity and always this kind of chivalrous charisma, which looking at it now in retrospect probably is a kind of a, you know, very sophisticated manipulation really. But look, even when he was 100, he died when he was 102, as I said. And when he was about 100, he had to have a leg amputated because of diabetes. And the nurses told me that they were very apologetic because after the surgery, they went in and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, Mr. Kennedy, but I'm afraid I've cut the wrong leg off your thermal long johns." And Bill said, "Don't worry, love, I'll wear them inside out." Look, he was in the nursing home for about 25 years. I think I might have even named a wing after him. And he just ran amok while he was there. One time he rang up very jubilant because he had won big on the Melbourne Cup sweep that he'd organised. And I said, "If you organised the sweep, how come you won?" And he said, "Oh, no." He said, "I just, you know, that's just the way it worked out." And I said, "What horse did you back?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't back any horses. We didn't back the horses. I organised another kind of a sweep at the home where I just got everybody, all the residents who had a walking frame, and I assembled them at the top of a corridor, and we took bets on them, and they had a race down the corridor. And because Bill never offered me any advice except this one sole bit of advice, I'll pass it on to you in the hope that perhaps under some weird stickers it might come in handy someday. He said, "If you ever want to back someone in a walking frame race, back the bloke whose frame's got wheels." So, anyway, it's not much, but you take what you can get, don't you? After he died, my dad and I found ourselves in Adelaide in a hire car driving around, and we ended up winding through the streets and, of course, going back to the house where grandfather Bill and my nana had lived for many, many years. And, of course, we parked at the front, and, it's true, you can never go back, can you? Everything looked totally transformed and different. Everything looked tiny. The little kind of, the massive walk to the fish pond that had taken forever as a child was just, 10 metres. And I said, let's go in and say hi. But, I didn't know who the owners were, but we'd come all this way, they won't mind. We'll go on in. So Dad was getting some stuff out of the car, and I went up. And I couldn't really understand the layout of the house, and I sort of went into this little porch to knock on the front door. And I was standing in this little sort of portico, sort of netted in a shade kind of porch. And I suddenly realised that I was standing in his special room, and it was about 3 metres square. And as I went to knock on the door, I had this kind of giddy sensation of something. I can't think of the word. I'm sure the Germans would have a word for it. A kind of a weird nostalgia for the very moment that I was in. A sort of a feeling of all this past pressing down upon the present as I knocked on the door in this little space that somehow he had created into this room full of the most wonderful latent possibilities and mysteries for all of us, because that's all he had. And I went to knock, and I suddenly realised why I was feeling so strange, I guess, because it struck me that is like childhood, isn't it? That is the state of childhood. In a room like that, full of wonders like that, tentatively knocking, wondering what welcome we might receive on the other side of that door. And I think it's that thing, that realising that all that stuff he had in that room, his little fossilised crayfish and his little bird that drank and his wind-up toys and his binoculars and his stamps and all those things that he had, I know that those things are incredibly ordinary. But I also know that the kind of legacy that I feel like I've been left from him is this incredible, dogged, almost bloody-minded belief in the ordinary. That the ordinary, with this power to transform into something else, is the very thing that kind of connects all of us, I guess. It's the thing that makes those stories part of everyone else's lives. And I guess that's what I want to talk about, is that kind of legacy of ordinariness. For someone who didn't leave any kind of, other legacy. He never made an empire, he never ran a newspaper, he never built a bridge, he never did anything big. All his legacy is those stories that are left from the people who have survived him. So that's kind of really what I want to talk about, was because it does seem to me that, the legacy I've inherited from him, which is that belief in the ordinary, has somehow managed to sort of overcome my stage fright in trying to communicate those things. So that's what I want to talk about. And oh, by the way, if anyone here is the Melbourne Museum, I still have Phar Lap's whip, if you're interested. Okay, thank you.